Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parenting is Easy podcast, where we will discuss the pleasures and the frustrations, the good and the bad, and the rewarding and the troubling aspects of parenting. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I'm a psychotherapist that specializes in working with teenagers, young adults, and parents with a specific niche in assisting with communication within the family dynamics. While everyone has their own unique journey and experiences as a parent and as a child, there are many common affiliations and attributes that we can all relate to and share. Together, we will learn from personal stories and experiences from parents across many different backgrounds, cultures, and communities. So get comfortable, grab your glass of coffee, and let's get right into the interview. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. Today, I have a guest that is going to share with us some interesting tidbits and topics that we have not discussed yet, but yet I am very excited to be talking about. Tim Reigle is a addictions coach, and he works with both parents, specifically with fathers, to help re-energize the family system and restoring their masculinity. He is also the author of the book, Living Porn Free, 10 Steps to Recovery, Redemption, and Renewal, and is also a coach who has helped hundreds of men overcome addiction to porn and sex, save their marriages, and become better men. He is a licensed funeral director as well, and I'm curious to hear a little bit about that and how that sort of comes into play in the family dynamics and regarding the parenting that we talk about here. He's also a chaplain, worship leader, and most importantly, and I love this part, a husband and a father. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
I want to get right into it over here, and there's a lot for us to talk about. So this book that you wrote is specifically about porn addiction and how it affects the families and how men can, not just men, can really recover from their addictions to porn and to sex. Where was that inspiration from, and what's like the background that sort of got you to even write something like this?
The background was really my own journey from it. I spent over 15 years fully addicted to porn and sexual addiction. So mine went beyond even just watching porn to where I had affairs and different things like that and got into all kinds of online hookups and all kinds of terrible things. So that's where it came from, was from my own recovery. About 5 years ago, I had what we call in addiction circles as D-Day, where Discovery Day, where you get exposed. So that happened a little over 5 years ago. And I had gotten caught before, and it was a known thing for a long time. And then it struggled and battled. And then I had periods where I was doing well, and then it would always go back. But that was the last time. And that last time I got serious help through a good mentor of mine, had help with dealing with the true cause and the true issues instead of just treating symptoms and just trying to basically try harder, was basically advice I had gotten before. Through a number of different things, I ended up mentoring some other young men who were going through struggling with porn. Through that, I found that there is a lot of resources for men dealing with porn addiction, but at the same time, they're not always the right resources. Mm-hmm. So I started writing. I started a blog. I started being active on social media, doing those type of things. And I found a need for what I call living porn free. It's a how to quit porn. And what I mean by that is so many of these things, they go so deep into the clinical side of things, which they should. You need to deal with those deeper emotional issues. They're either focused on that too much, or they're focused way too much on the habit side. It's either one or the other. And I found that guys just needed a guide to where they're coming to me and they're like, hey, Tim, I'm addicted to porn. I can't stop. What do I do? Where do I start?
Right.
And so living porn free came out of the desire to be like, hey, let's take these 10 steps. Let's stop the bleeding. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's get some success under our belts. Let's put some habits in place. Let's deal with some of the issues. And then let's dive in here. Because so many men are just so overwhelmed. They go a while and then they relapse and they feel like they're starting over again. And they just need something to let's get started. And let's figure out how to do this. So that's where the book came from, was how to quit.
So there are so many things to unpack over there. Going back to you for a second and what you've been through. Was there a certain time where you can say, this is where my porn exposure and use was getting out of hand and starting to affect other things in life? Or is it even from day one, you can say even that was something that was really wrong in the first place and I shouldn't have, that's where it started?
I knew it was wrong from day one. There was never a time where I really tried to justify it or didn't think it was a problem or thought it was okay or normal or healthy or any of those things. I knew from the get-go, from the time I was 12, 13 years old, that this was wrong, was something I shouldn't be doing. There was a lot of shame attached to it. Then, of course, when I got older, I got married, had kids, then it really piled on. And
was there ever a point where you stopped, or is there a point it was just continuous from the first time?
there were periods where I had months at a time. I even went a year once.
When did you start? What was your first exposure?
Probably 12 or 13. To be honest, I don't actually remember the first time. A lot of the guys I work with, there's this definitive moment in their life that they vividly remember, and I really don't. I was just a curious, hormonal teenage boy. I was never abused or had any major red flag trauma or anything like that. I grew up in a good home, had good parents, but I was never really taught much about sex. I was never really taught much about porn. The big three were don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex.
It was more taboo, and then it was anything else.
It was more the taboo nature, the curiosity of it, the danger of the forbidden type of thing, the forbidden fruit, if you will.
Right.
That kind of led me there. And so I was told this thing was this horrible thing for so long and don't do these things. And then when that's beaten into you, which came from a rightful place, parents should, but all it was just don't do this, it's bad.
No concept of the feelings of hormones being normal for certain ages and it being something that needs to be worked with.
Exactly.
It was more like, no, let's just shove it under the rug. And that curiosity can really get the best of any child in any way.
Yeah, and it did. Then I did it, and I started watching porn. I was like, this is awesome. Was it? You're 13, 14, and I was just hooked from there. And there was never like a red light bulb going off above my head moment where I was like, I got to stop. This is terrible. That was consistent throughout, and I made pledges to stop. I tried counseling. I tried working with pastors, and the motivation to stop all along was one, knowing it was wrong, two, seeing the damage it had done to my marriage, family damage, all those sort of things. All those were reasons I wanted to stop. I had plenty of reasons to stop. I had consequences. I had things for it. I just couldn't. And the main reason I couldn't was because I never really dealt with the real issues. I never really dove deep inside and figured out why am I watching porn and having all this sex.
Then you go into this, there's the psychology behind it, and then there's behavior behind it, and then there's the book, where it's breaking it down into three categories, which I think very helpful for a lot of people. And one thing I was thinking of as you were saying that before is sometimes we don't even know what it is that we don't know when it comes to having to fix certain things. And I think that's exactly what you're saying of, I understand that there's a psychology behind it. I understand that there are certain things and behaviors that I have to stay away from. And how the hell do I stop? And that's really where this inspiration from the book came from. We're talking about teenagers being exposed to this for the first time. Are there certain things that, let's say, you talk about in your repertoire of different things that you do for work, where let's say that you would recommend to parents to be on the lookout, for the healthy conversation to have with a child, and also to be on the lookout for something that you know your child is doing something that is not age appropriate? What would you say to parents?
Right. The biggest thing I always tell parents is whatever age they think their kids are ready for the sex talk, do it 2 to 3 years before then. Because chances are they're hearing about it. It doesn't matter where they're at, how secluded they are, if they go to Christian school, all these different things, they're being exposed to it. I can guarantee it. The other thing we're doing is we're giving these things to 9 and 10-year-olds and giving them uncontrolled, supervised access, even if it is our quote unquote parental controls. These kids can get past them. I could get past them. These young kids can get past it. So we need to have the conversation first. And the conversation can't just be, don't do it, it's bad. And you're not going to scare these kids out of it. You're not. The other thing is tell them that sex isn't a bad thing. And that's something that I see a lot. I'm very involved with the church. I'm a very strong man of faith. That the church has gotten very bad at is doing the right thing by promoting abstinence. They've created this thing, this image that sex is bad.
I don't think it's only in the Christian faith. I think it's out there in other faiths as well. And I think that's something, especially when you're saying something is bad and you're also not replacing it with anything. So if I tell you, Tim, don't think about pink elephants, right? You're going to think about pink elephants. If there's a way to talk about it, like we were saying, a healthy way to talk about sex, how it can be a beautiful thing within a marriage, within a relationship, within a way where this can bring out the best in you and the best in your partner in a beautiful way. And it brings about that healthy sense of what sex actually is. But I want to go back even to what you were saying regarding a parent talking to their children. I think there's also a part of, it's not just about the sex talk as it's known, but there is an environment of needing to have comfort to have the conversations with your child. It's like having the uncomfortable conversation with your child and inviting them in to have the conversation with you. It probably should not be starting with just that sex talk and also with a 14-year-old.
It starts long before that. In fact, a good friend of mine, Pastor Michael Foster, who I had on my podcast, says that the battle
100%.
against pornography starts when kids are toddlers. Now, and he doesn't mean
100%.
that you're talking about porn and sex to toddlers. And maybe that's a little bit of a clickbait headline. But the point is, the conversation starts when you teach your kids that you have to wait till after dinner to have your popsicle. They can't just always get instant gratification whenever they want. That some things are worth waiting for. Talking to your kids about expressing their feelings, expressing their emotions, having close conversations with your kids, talking to your kids, getting them to understanding them, getting to the point where you're there for them and that they trust you enough to come to you when they've made a mistake, when they're tempted to do something bad. If you don't develop those things in your kids when they're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, they're sure as hell not going to come to you when they're 15, 16, 17.
Right. Exactly. One of the ways I like saying, oh, for sure, it starts at, like your pastor friend was saying, it starts at in the toddler age where a child feels like, oh, look, I just drew a circle and they want to show it to you. And when we give them and we invite them as parents to have this big smile on their face, wow, you just made a circle. And now they say, oh, wow, look, when I speak to mommy, there's a certain reaction that I get from speaking to her. And as that continues throughout their youth, so then when they're 13, 14 years old and someone says, why is it that a mommy's chest looks different than daddy's chest? And then you can have that discussion of, that's a beautiful, great question, which is also very inviting when you are supportive of the questions that are being asked. And then you can have that discussion. But like you're saying, it starts much earlier. The phrase that I heard from a mentor of mine is, we want to turn, I know I've said it here on the podcast before, but I still think it's such a apropos line. We want to turn our child's reactions to be, I can't tell my parents. We want to change that to, I can't wait to tell my parents. And that's what we want. And the more we're able to do that, not just about the sex talk or about any type of pornography, but it's about everything. Are there certain, I guess you could say, cornerstones when it comes to having that invitation at home that could be important, whether it's certain things around the house or whether it's not just conversations, but just regarding, I guess you could say, crumbs that parents can place throughout youth, throughout the toddler stages even, that parents can do to start that invitation?
Yeah, and I think that's probably different for every kid, but it's understanding that what you just talked about, having those conversations with kids, being available to them, being present. So many of parents, they're there, but they aren't there and available to their kids. One thing I've said a lot is there's a lot of fatherless homes with the dad still living in them. And I was one of those for a long time. Like, I was here. I came home every day. There's a roof over their heads. There's food on the table. There's that. And then I thought, oh, that's okay. My kids have clothes on their back. Their bellies are full. They're going to school. They're cared for. But our responsibilities as parents don't end there. And for too many guys, they're not there. And fathers especially aren't there and aren't available to their kids. A friend of mine says all the time, presence over presence. Presence as in being there over presence as in gifts. And just being there, spending time with your kids. But you're not going to get to the point that you can have those close conversations and them to have that trust and faith in you to come to you with difficult things if you aren't there spending time with them, understanding them at their level, and just being there and having fun with them and creating memories. And that's just so important, just that those little things day in and day out. There's no huge major thing that you have to, like, at age 5, do this, at age 8, do this, at age 10, do this. It's just those little things day in and day out. Coming home as a dad, and this was something I did. I came home. I didn't want anything to do with my wife and kids. I was busy. I was tired. I was exhausted from work. I wanted to come home, have a beer, and relax. But my kids needed me.
For sure.
They needed me to come home. They needed dad. If all your kids see is every day when your dad gets home from work, all they see is tired and worn out dad, and on the weekends, all they see is drunk dad, they're not getting the father they need. And yeah, we're tired. Yeah, we're worn out. Yeah, every once in a while you deserve a beer. It's fine. But the kids got to come first. And sometimes you got to push through that and be like, you know what? My kids need me now more than I need that beer after a hard day's work.
Oh, for sure.
And that's a mistake that I had made, besides all the other stuff I was doing with porn and sex, just not being as a present father. And it had consequences over time. My behavior had consequences with the addiction. But then it also escalated into where it bled over into other areas of my life and kept me from being the engaged father that I needed to be.
And husband probably as well.
And well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So where you talk about from pastor friends and being a worship leader yourself, where does a higher power come into play with this? And how can someone use that as a healthy, vital tool towards their recovery and understanding of what it is that they're going through?
Right. The two biggest things that I believe that faith provides me in regards to addiction is strength and forgiveness. So my faith provides me with strength to overcome the addiction, to overcome temptation. Gives me strength to keep going when I feel like giving up. The Psalms talk about how the Lord is our refuge and strength, our ever-present help in times of trouble. He gives us that refuge that we need when we feel like the world is coming down all around us. When we feel like the temptation and everything is just so overwhelming and we can't possibly handle it. We feel this tension we need to act out and nothing we can do can make that go away. He's the one who gives us that comfort and that peace and that strength. The second is forgiveness. And that's the redemption part that I talk about in the book, is the forgiveness for our sins. And no matter how much we've done, no matter how broken we might be, no matter how many times we've made mistakes and sinned and done horrible things, that we are forgiven of that. And we are washed clean. And if we repent of that, confess and repent and turn away from that, we are forgiven and we can start again. And that's where the renewal comes in. I talk about the book, recovery, redemption, and renewal. Is the recovery is quitting. The redemption is the forgiveness, and the renewal is the change that your life makes after you've done it.
And those are all three separate steps, but they all work in unison to get us to a place where we are better versions of ourselves. How about the part of forgiveness of self for the hell that we've not only put others through, but even ourselves through? And once there's a realization that, oh man, I've messed up and I have to work on this, and obviously bringing faith into that, but there's obviously the forgiveness from the higher power that allows us to continue the journey in a much healthier way and raise our families properly and be better versions of ourselves. But how about the forgiveness of self? Where does that come into play in this?
I think that comes through the healing process of it. I always say that porn and sex addiction isn't something that you quit, it's something you heal from. There's emotional things that are underneath of it. The emotion and using porn and sex to cope with things and to escape and to deal with things is the true cause of the addiction. It's not that we're just hornier than everybody else or have a high sex drive. By coming and healing those wounds that are pushing us towards the addiction. And that's where that emotional healing comes from. And then when you're able to heal from those things, you're able to come to terms with it. You're able to forgive yourself. And a lot of times I don't even like the term forgive yourself, because to me, ultimately, God is the one who does the forgiving. And if God is forgiving me for my sins and Jesus died for my sins, then who am I not to give myself the same grace? But I think it comes through that healing. Once you can deal with the emotional side of it, figure out what's really going on behind it, then that takes the shame out of it. Once you've dealt with the emotional side, that shame that can be so overwhelming goes away. And once you have that forgiveness, that shame goes away. And that's where that healing and forgiveness of yourself comes in.
I think it's something that when a person has a higher power and the assistance that it helps alleviate the burden that's on us, I think makes the journey to recovery so much easier. What would you say to someone that is struggling with their higher power or has lost faith in some way, and also realizing that they're having issues and their marriage is failing and their relationship with their kids is out the window, but at the same time, they're having a hard time with their faith? What would you say to someone like that?
I would say you're not alone and that Christ still loves you no matter what. There's, like I said earlier, there's nothing you can do that makes you too broken, that makes you too far gone, that makes you unforgivable. We often think when we're doing this that the shame is so bad and that we are just a lost cause. A lot of guys come to me for coaching and they're just like, Tim, I've just given up. Just be like, this is my lot in life and this is how it's going to be. And if it destroys my family, then I deserve it. And all of that. And that's true. There are consequences for all those sins. But to me and to my faith, there's someone who paid the price for all those sins. And he took the penalty that I deserved so that I might live righteously. To have that knowledge and that faith in there, it gives us that strength, it gives us that forgiveness, and most importantly, gives us hope. That's the thing. One of the most important things that faith in God will give you is hope. When all else fails, there's hope. There's hope to be free. There's hope for forgiveness. There's hope for eternal life with him. And that's the most important thing that I think faith can give someone. And that I would say to them is never give up hope. But left to our own devices, there is no hope because we're all sinners. We're all condemned in our sin. And we don't have the strength to overcome that. We as humans and as a fallen world, ever since the fall of Adam, we are set to sin. Paul talks in Romans that it's the sin that lives within us and that we're slaves to it, literally. But through faith and through redemption, through repentance, forgiveness, we can be set free from that. And that's the most important thing. And that hope of that freedom is the most important thing that I think faith will give you.
So when you talk about the wilderness, is I think the name of your ministry, where does wilderness come into this? And where is that something of, I guess you say going out there, not just staying in? How is that something that I guess is a part of the recovery?
So the term into the wilderness comes from Luke 4, where Jesus went into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. That's where the term comes from. And for me, it's looking at it like, hey, this is our wilderness. We're going to go in. We're going to face our demons like Jesus did literally. We're going to face temptation. We're going to struggle, but we're going to come out. We need to go through that time of testing, that time of trial and tribulation. We need to face ourselves, face our demons. We need to rely on God, rely on Scripture to get us through, because every time Jesus was tempted, he responded with Scripture. And then when we come out of that, we're ready to get back to work and ready to go into ministry. When Jesus was done in the wilderness, that was his initiation, I guess you will, into his public ministry on earth. For us, it's coming through that, conquering that, and it's okay. I'm going to go into and be the husband I need to be. I'm going to be the father I need to be. Maybe my ministries like mine is turning around and helping others through that wilderness and overcoming those things.
Which you're saying is a part of the recovery.
Correct. Yeah. So that's where the into the wilderness comes from.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I think the biggest thing that I'm hearing from here is an awareness of self to know where we are, to know where it is we need to go, which is, I think, is overall what you're saying. But I want to go back to that question I was saying before. And I think for a lot of people that are listening to this podcast that may not have that same belief, that same faith for whatever reason, whether they're from a different background or from experiences that they've been through, or they've been born into a different religion. How and where can they go to a place of, hey, I need help, and I also really need to work on things for myself regarding where this addiction is coming from? How can the concept of higher power be explained to them? And in some ways, I think it's imperative to be implemented in the treatment. What is something that they can, as you could say, turn that dark pair of glasses they might have towards higher power, towards faith, towards religion, that can take away that darkness from their eyes? What would you say to them?
I'm a Christian and a very strong man of faith, but I don't believe that you have to be a man of faith or have to be a Christian man of faith to quit porn and sex addiction. And I don't think that just because the Christian faith says it's a bad thing should be the only reason that you quit watching porn either.
If that's the only reason why you're doing it, might not last so long.
Exactly. And I work with a lot of guys who are of other faiths or of no faith. To truly, I think, heal from this, you have to, like you say, really examine yourself and get in touch with your inner self. One of the things that I really focus on with a lot of guys is journaling, meditation, time alone and solitude, just with your thoughts. I mean, that can be hard for a lot of guys.
Well, for many people, that's the reason why they go towards porn, because they're afraid to go inside.
Exactly. They're afraid of the silence. Whether that is considered dealing with a higher power or not, just being able to be there with yourself, being comfortable with you and your own thoughts and the silence. And that's where you can find what the true cause is. You have to be able to the point where you can do the self-examination, the self-analysis, and peel back all those layers of scar tissue that we've been hiding from for so long to get to the true cause. That takes a lot of deep work.
Oh, yeah. And that also can't be done alone.
Generally can't be done alone. That's where like my coaching comes in. And it takes time. When I do my coaching, we're not doing that week one. We're doing that after a few weeks and maybe in a few months of work to get to that point. Because a lot of this stuff is buried deep. It's deep-seated emotional pain, emotional trauma, There's wounds there. There's things that we've been hiding from or covering up for a long time. Sometimes, like I said earlier, they're major red flag trauma, abuse, neglect, divorce, death. But just as often, and maybe not even more, they're more subtle things. They're fears. They're fears of rejection, fears of not being good enough, things like that are deep seated and hidden in there. And it takes a while to pull those out. And it takes a lot of deep work to pull that out. And to do that, you have to be willing to go to some of these dark places. We've been using porn and sex to run away from these dark places for years. We have to go to that dark place, and connecting with a quote unquote higher power, whatever faith or religion or whatever that might be for you. For me, it's very well defined, but for others, it might not be. Whatever helps you to get to that point, prayer, meditation, journaling, that's where you need to go to do the deep work that will help you heal.
Yeah. The way we say it, like here in this podcast a lot, is to make a U-turn and to go back in. And when we could go back in and we could start being comfortable with ourselves, that's probably one of, if not the most vital part to any sort of recovery that we're going to make. And I think that's going to be very important for not just anyone dealing with porn addiction and sex addiction, but any sort of behavior that can be unhealthy to their relationships with others and with self. And I think that goes a very long way of being able to go inside. And that can be very uncomfortable. And I think it's worth to note that the concept of going inside can be very painful and it can be very scary. It's sending a 6-year-old up to the attic of a 100-year-old house and say, go get something at 10:30 at night without a flashlight. It's not something that we want to do. And that's where, when we give assistance, when we give a flashlight, we have an adult go with the child. So it's supported in going into that dark place. And that's where coaching comes into place. That's where groups, that's where a higher power, journaling, which the part I read about recently that's so beneficial with journaling. It's not just about the actual getting things from here, from your brain and from your heart out onto paper, but it's actual the physical work of the movement of the hand that helps express, that is so helpful and so therapeutic. And for those people, and I am one of them, that are guilty of saying in the past, I don't know what to write, just put the pen to the paper. And when you start talking about how you're feeling and what's happening on the inside or what I can't feel, that's where the start is, of just saying right now, I can't feel, I'm feeling numb, or there is no feeling, or my relationship with so-and-so is non-existent because I don't know. Let's see where it goes from there. And I think it could be so beneficial. The one thing I would also add to that, when we talk about journaling or we talk about any form of treatment, you have to do what works for you. And it's okay if you're going to start on journaling saying, this is not working for me. Okay. So maybe there's a coach that you can speak to. Maybe there's a therapist out there. Maybe there's a book out there. Tim, you've been talking about Psalms, which you look at the author of Psalms, look at David and the life that he's been through. And that's someone in history that I always resonated with me, to see where his life was and see what he wrote because of it. It's very moving. And that works for me. Might not work for someone else. That's okay. And person finding the thing that works for them. I want to move this conversation a little bit to another part of your job of running sermons in a funeral home, and how that's something, how in some ways, I think it brings everything that you do all under one umbrella and just being a part of it. But at the same time, the part that I'm most curious about, and we could talk about it in general, is the effects that you have to deal with based on the family dynamics that come about from people that are coming to you to run a funeral. What is that experience like? And what is something you can share regarding a parent that has obviously witnessed so much pain and needing to be a support and a pillar in so many ways for so many people? What would you say to parents that either have the loved one that is about to go through the funeral system for a unfortunate death, or I guess tidbits that you would like to give to parents that might be bringing a child to a funeral that have never been there before? What would you say to someone like that?
Mm-hmm. Sure. In my experience, I've been working in the funeral industry for over 20 years now, since I was a kid, since I was a teenager. The biggest thing that I've noticed is that people are not prepared to handle death, either of a loved one or even of themselves. So in multiple ways, they're not prepared logistically, as in financially and logistically, as far as finances and legal stuff and wills and all that sort of stuff. And I don't really want to get into that, but they aren't prepared for that, but they aren't prepared emotionally either. We have become a death-denying society, and we push death aside, and we continue to keep hiding it as much as we can. Years ago, death was readily apparent. Almost every married couple 100 years ago had lost a baby. Almost every one at that point. And when people died, grandma and grandpa were still in the home. They weren't shipped off to some nursing home for the last 5 years of their life where they died quietly. They were in the home. Families saw that process. It was more apparent. People took people to funerals. It was normal to go to a funeral. Even when I was a kid, we went to funerals from people at church or coworkers and stuff like that. We've become such a death-denying society. When it happens, people aren't prepared for it. And people don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to handle the grief, handle the emotions, handle the logistics, handle the finances. They don't know how to do any of that.
So what would be the top 3 things that you would say to parents or the parent, let's say in a situation where a spouse died and there are kids involved? You're going to be involved in the process from the funeral, burial, and maybe even some aftermath as well. What would be the top few things that you would say for preparation for something like that?
One thing that I tell parents all the time in regards to their kids and funerals, number 1 is don't lie to them. Don't hide them from anything. Don't tell them grandma's just sleeping. That's one of the worst things you can tell a kid. Don't hide it from them. If there's an open casket, take them. People think that these kids are going to be traumatized by seeing an open casket. No, they're not. No, they're not. But the other thing is, and this is something I really recommend to parents, and this is something I learned from my parents. They taught me this. Now, I grew up a little bit different. My dad was a pastor, so I was at funerals all the time as a kid. Take your kids to a funeral, especially an open casket funeral, of somebody that they have no emotional connection to. If there's some old lady at church that dies, the kids know nothing about, have no connection to, take them to her funeral, her viewing, and expose them to it when there's not an emotion attached to it. Don't let grandma or grandpa be the first dead body that those kids see in a casket.
Sort of like exposure therapy.
A little bit, yeah. But the kids are going to have all these questions about death and all that sort of stuff. Let them do that when they're not grieving the loss of grandma or grandpa. A lot of these people are going through life and they've never been to a funeral and they're becoming teenagers, 20-something years old. They've never been to a funeral. And so when grandma dies, they don't have no idea what's happening, what it's about. They've never had talks about death. They've never had talks about legacy or any of those type of things. So my recommendation is to take kids to funerals when they're young, when they're obviously not if they're 2, when they're 6, 7, 8 years old. Take them to a funeral. Let them see a body in a casket and let them ask all those questions about death. That's a very good point to go circle back to what we talked about earlier about having conversations with your kids,
communication,
and answering their questions and having that communication. Do that when there isn't grief and emotion attached to it, so that when grandma or grandpa does die, they've already been exposed to that. They know what to expect, and they can focus on their emotions and not on all these overwhelming questions about life and death.
Yeah.
That would be my biggest recommendation to parents of kids. Is I see so many times where people come to funerals, and if there's an open casket, they make the kids stay out in the lobby of the funeral home and don't let them go in and see the body because they're scared they're going to be traumatized by it. These kids are seeing death in every area of their lives, TV, video games, movies, exactly. God knows what, none of which are realistic, by the way. Right. Let them see and experience, because it's life. Death is life. Death is a part of life.
And it's a big part of life.
And so if you're going to experience it, you're not hiding, you're not saving your kids from anything by not letting them be exposed to the death of somebody. So that's my biggest recommendation, is to take your kids to stuff. Don't hide them from it. Don't lie to them. Tell them the truth. Have those open and honest conversations with them. And then when they get older, they'll be much better prepared to handle it when grandma and grandpa pass away, when mom and dad pass away. They'll be in a much better place to handle that.
And just add on to that a little bit, like we were saying before, there is no age where it's okay. So this is the age we talk about death. It's more like when there is that conversation and the invitation for conversation. And for example, I just had it this past Friday night with my 8-year-old for the first time as she's going to bed. Sure, certain things on her head. And by dinner that night, we were talking about a grandmother that's getting pretty close and on her deathbed, and freaked her out a little bit. So when we have a conversation saying, yeah, it's hard and it's beautiful and it's something that's a part of life and we have to talk about it. Now, for my older 2 there on top of her, that conversation didn't happen until much later. 8, 9 years old might be too young for certain people. And if there's certain exposure just based on family circumstances, to still have the conversation could be so helpful for that comfortability around something which is a part of everybody's life in some way. We've gone from pornography, recovery, talking about death and funerals. I'm curious if there are certain things that, based on your work and your expertise, that are usually talk about that maybe I didn't get a chance to ask about today.
Not too much, really. Pretty much covered everything. I know I wear a lot of hats in my life. And in some ways, like you say, they all do come together and come full circle and apply to each other. There's things that that certainly correlate. And grief is something that has pushed a lot of people towards porn and sex addiction and all kinds of other addictions.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of it boils down to not being able to deal with our emotions, deal with our inner selves in a healthy way, whatever direction that comes from or whatever started that. And a lot of that comes from parents not helping kids to learn and understand and process those things in a healthy way, like we've talked about. So if parents don't have those conversations, it could lead to the kids being exposed to and then ultimately getting addicted to porn and sex because they never learned how to deal with those emotions in a healthy way. They learn to seek instant gratification and I feel pain, I'm going to run away and escape. Or it can lead to, if they never learn to process emotions, when so-and-so dies, they have no idea what to do with that emotion and that pain and that grief. So it all boils down to parenting and having those conversations with your kids and building those relationships with your kids so that they learn to do these things in a healthy way and don't learn to cope with negative things or escape and learn to face them head on and deal with them in healthy ways and learn healthy coping mechanisms.
Are there places where people can find you on social media or websites?
Sure. The best place to find me is probably on social media. I'm most on Twitter and Instagram, and my screen name's the same. It's Timothy Reigle, Timothy Reigle. My website's the same way too, is timothyreigle.com. You can find out more about my coaching and what I do with helping men overcome porn and sex addiction, helping them heal their marriages and families in that recovery. My podcast is on there. My blog posts, all that's on there, timothyreigle.com.
Amazing. And we will post that in the show notes as well. I like ending a podcast with 3 rapid fire questions over here. My first question to you is, if you can think of a specific embarrassing or funny story that happened to you as a parent, as you've been parenting, what was something that you would like to share?
I guess one time when my youngest was a baby, I don't remember how old she was, probably 8 or 9 months old. We were going to like an appointment or whatever, and she's in the back seat in the car seat, fell asleep in the car seat like they do, and we go in, my wife and I go in, we're sitting there in the waiting room, just waiting to go into I think it was a doctor's appointment for the baby, actually. And we sat in the waiting room, we both looked at each other and we're like, baby's still in the car. And it was like 5 minutes. It was nothing. And it was like, she was right outside the door. We were 20 feet away from her, but we're going to this appointment for her. And we realized we didn't bring her with us and we go out and she's in the car. She's sitting in the car. She's She was fine. It's one of those memories you think back on and laugh at years later.
Yeah. Years later. Exactly. Is there a book or a podcast besides for your own that you would recommend to help regarding any of the topics we talked about today for parents?
Yeah, there really is. There's a book right here that one of my best friends wrote. His name's Jerry Adams. It's called Men of Grit, Strong as Steel. And it talks about helping men become strong husbands, strong leaders, strong fathers, strong members of their faith communities. And it's just an excellent book to help men find the inner strength that they need and apply that to all aspects of their life, marriage, fatherhood, family, all beautiful. Faith, everything.
Okay. And we'll see if we can find a link for that somewhere, and we'll try to post that in the show notes as well. My last question to you is, if you can think of a everyday mundane superpower that you would like to have as a dad, what would that be?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. Mundane superpower. I guess it would just be, I have 2 teenage girls, so I guess it would be able to read their minds.
I feel like I'd be scared to read my teenager's mind.
That might be true. That might be too, but
mind reading.
Yeah, to be able to understand the mind of a teenage girl would be very beneficial.
Okay, I like that. That's an awesome one. Tim, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Hey again. I hope you were able to learn as much as I did today. Thank you so much for staying to the end and listening to the entire interview. Please feel free to leave a comment wherever you listen to this podcast. All comments will be read weekly, and we appreciate all feedback and ideas. If you have an idea for a guest or a specific topic, please feel free to share. Additionally, you can contact us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining today, and remember, parenting is a journey. Don't forget to enjoy it. The goal is to be a little better today than yesterday, and hopefully better tomorrow than we were today.